All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this event that we are so excited to share with you. My name is Andrea Wolfbuck. I'm the Communications Director for Conservation Northwest. If you're not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization based out of Seattle, but we've got folks all over the state, and our mission is to protect, connect, and restore wildlife and wildlands in Washington State and a little bit into British Columbia. So we work very closely with our partners, who many of whom are on this call, with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Washington Department of Transportation, so WDFW and WashDOT. And so we all work together to just try to make this state better for our wildlife, which is what we're focusing on today, and especially wildlife connectivity around the state. So I'm going to do a quick intro of what you can expect from us this evening, and then I will introduce you to our panel of experts who are here to answer every weird question you could possibly have about wildlife or wildlife connectivity, anything in that world. Really, actually, we're here to answer almost anything. So this film that we're going to watch is about 10 minutes long. So we just released it last fall, partnership with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and Conservation Northwest, with a large amount of support from our friends at WashDOT. This is the second film that we've partnered on. We did another one a couple of years ago that you can find on our YouTube channel. It's called This Land is Part of Us. And while that one focused on the shrub steppe area of the state, this one is more of a Habitat Connectivity 101, about the whole state and some of the challenges that we're facing and the solutions that we're looking at. So that's a very brief description. We're going to get into the film pretty quickly. While the film is going on, feel free to throw any questions you have in the Q&A function on your Zoom, and then we will go through all of them. And then really quick, I'm going to just go around and introduce our folks really quickly, just to let you know who we have here, and then you'll have a chance to meet them right after the film and then grill them with all your questions. So we've got a really great panel of folks. I mean, these people are at the forefront of all the work that we're doing in the state. Everything is a partnership with nonprofits, with our government agencies, with our tribal friends, with we have to work with our legislators, community members. That might be the most important one. And so everybody is involved to get this work done, which hopefully you'll see in this film and in this event this evening, how all of this could not be done without collaboration and teamwork. And that includes all of you that have chosen to spend an hour with us this evening. So thank you for your time, and hopefully this is going to be educational, and we're really excited to show it to you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce who we've got here. If when I call your name, panelists, if you want to just turn your camera on and do a little wave so people can see your face, that would be great. I'm going to start with my colleague, Brian Stewart. So he manages our Cascades to Olympics program at Conservation Northwest. So he really focuses his work down in Southwest Washington, which right now it means we're focusing on how do we get over I-5 and how do critters get over I-5. So I-5, when you think about, I'm sure that most of you here have driven that up and down the state, is a huge barrier for wildlife. So Brian's going to fix that. So I get to work with him at Conservation Northwest. He's going to be a great asset here. We have a couple of our friends from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we've got two habitat biologists, Scott Downs, and then we also have Elizabeth Torrey. And so they are biologists, have been, you'll see them in the film as well, and wonderful, wonderful experts who have tons of experience in this field. And feel free to ask them any critter question. They love to talk about bats and toads. I'm just throwing that out there. Those are two of their favorite species. And then we've got over from Washington Department of Transportation, we have Glenn Kalitz. That's Glenn Kalitz, and he's a habitat connectivity biologist with Washington Department of Transportation. So he's at the forefront of figuring out where the best place to put crossings are, dealing with all of the transportation issues. So he's going to be a great resource for talking about the nitty-gritty when it comes to our state's highways. And then we've got Melissa Spieg. She's a local conservationist and community member based in Kittitas County. She's been involved in a lot of different worlds of conservation, personally and professionally. And so she's going to be a great resource for you folks who are just, regular people who want to know how they can help wildlife connectivity, doing one little step at a time. So we've got Melissa here. And then we've got our two filmmakers. So we've got Ted Gradowski and Darren Gunkel, and they are the filmmakers that we've partnered with on numerous films to share knowledge and information about conservation in Washington. Ted is actually celebrating his 10th year doing films with Conservation Northwest. So we've done a lot of work with him over the years, and he really brings all of this somewhat complicated scientific information to light, and hopefully in a way that people can really understand it and grasp what we're trying to share with you. And then last but not least, I've got Jennifer Johnson here. She's a communication specialist from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and she and I will be your hosts for the evening. So we're going to be here to help answer any questions, and yeah, and we're just really, really happy that we've got so many of you folks joining us this evening. So I think unless we have any questions, throw those questions in there. We'll get to them after the film. I think we're going to just go ahead and roll straight into Wild Ways, our short film that we created for you folks. And so I'm going to pass it on over to the film, and I hope you enjoy it, and then we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes.
Historically, animals were able to move through the ecosystems all across the state much more easily than they are today.
You could have cougars that could very easily crisscross the entire state in a matter of weeks.
There are amphibians that just migrate a couple hundred yards.
Elk move throughout the year. In the wintertime, they come to our lowland forested areas where they can access food a little bit more easily. And then during the summer, they need to be able to move up high.
Even small species such as fritillary butterflies and other types of pollinators migrate across the landscape.
There are very few species that don't migrate or move in some capacity.
Humans came in and we just drew lines. We drew lines with roads, we drew lines with railroad tracks, we drew lines with dams in the water and fences. And so that makes it difficult for animals to move across the landscape.
Habitat connectivity is the degree to which the landscape allows ecological flows, like animal movement. It's essentially the opposite of habitat fragmentation. Everywhere developments exist, anywhere we have populations of people, anywhere we have roads, there's definitely habitat fragmentation.
Wildlife connectivity is just like human connectivity. People need the ability to go to stores and school, to move when things get too cold or too hot. And animals need the exact same.
Changing the movements of wildlife is a very big deal. We have more negative interactions with humans and wildlife, and it affects their ability to survive.
Pronghorn are commonly known to make very long-distance migrations. As they're reintroduced, there are going to be major challenges with habitat connectivity for that specific species. Even something like a small fence that any person could step over may be a complete barrier to their movements.
Western toads are a really interesting and important native amphibian that also needs connectivity. The toads lay their eggs and produce tadpoles in our small wetland and stream environments, and then as they grow up into adult toads, move up into the uplands. And so we have adult toads and toadlets trying to cross the roadways and unfortunately being run over by cars or people who don't realize that those toads are trying to make a great migration.
Too much light in some places can fragment habitat, too much noise. A barn built on a riverside. Some of the bigger barriers are cities and development, interstates, highways, traffic. If we want to see viable wildlife populations have healthy ecosystems, then we need to absolutely focus on and work on habitat connectivity in the state of Washington.
My name's Jason Fedora. I'm with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm the wildlife biologist for Benton and Franklin counties. Standing in Franklin County at one of the irrigation canals. We've got hundreds of miles of these across the eastern Washington irrigated landscape. So the design of these is really good for transporting water, but really difficult for animals to cross or get out of. Once inside the canal, deer and elk and hoofed animals find it really difficult to escape. Animals often get drawn into canals just by trying to follow natural migratory corridors. Oftentimes, if we're able to get an animal out, we find that the hooves have been worn down from trying to climb up the concrete sides, that the hooves have been worn down to the bone. And often euthanization is the only humane option at that point.
We need to find a way to coexist together so that wildlife can move freely once again through the landscape.
I feel like Washington State has some of the best minds working on habitat connectivity issues, and we know what to do, we know where to do it, we know how to do it.
Reducing fragmentation and creating a connected landscape for wildlife will require changes, but not giant changes.
Tried and true method of solving habitat fragmentation that's caused by roads is building wildlife crossing structures. And you may have seen one on Interstate 90 just east of Snoqualmie Pass. We're seeing new species show up like moose. We recently had a moose cross from north to south at an underpass called Resort Creek within the Snoqualmie Pass East project area. That one probably came out of the North Cascades, and we do know there's habitat south of I-90 that could support moose. I just think maybe they've never been able to reach it before wildlife crossings were built on I-90.
There are things that irrigation distribution systems can do to make things better for fish and wildlife and better for the farms at the same time. So as the Kittitas Reclamation District enters its aggressive water conservation program, we always take into consideration animal safety so we can get them out. We actually install animal escape ramps specifically designed for getting animals out of a canal system where they can get their footing, they can walk up and they can just jump over that and then off they go.
The area of US 97 between approximately Riverside and Tonasket is, no matter how you slice it, the top 3 worst deer vehicle collision areas in the state. It's also an important ecological area. There's been a lot of work, primarily by Conservation Northwest over the years, to find the money to upgrade that corridor, to install 1 mile of fencing south of Janus Bridge over the Okanagan River. We saw essentially a 91% drop in collisions in that fence section as well.
We can all make a difference in wildlife connectivity. So if you bring in citizens and local landowners, you can come up with solutions.
Reach out to a habitat biologist at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, whose job it is to provide technical assistance and advice on how the public can design and improve their land. That can be as simple as a small connected patch of flowers or native plants in a person's yard or in their neighborhood. Urban planners, especially for cities and counties and at the state level, are some of the most important people for making sure that we have wildlife connectivity into the future.
I think the real way to know that we've achieved our goal is that our planning processes include wildlife connectivity at the very beginning.
This is a massive issue that has the potential to affect practically every species in the state.
We can't not afford to do wildlife connectivity projects. Think about the impact it would have if we lost our elk and our deer.
Washington has such an amazing array of wildlife and ecosystems and habitats. It's what makes living here so special. To keep it that way, we need healthy and connected habitats.
All right, I hope you all enjoyed the film. And we see that there are some great questions coming in. And if you don't know where to put your question, just go ahead and go down to it's about the center bottom should be of your screen. And there's some little balloons that say Q&A. So just go ahead and type your questions in there. And let's see, we had some good ones. There's one here about, do we have a list of most valuable native plants we can add to our residential land? Think small size for small spaces. And I think we have somebody who's willing to answer that question. Was that you, Scott?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So obviously it depends on where you live in the state. We're going to type in a link within the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're building a website called It's Habitat for Home. And so within that, there's some stuff that you can do to help build a place for animals within your property, whether it's even as small as a small condo back deck to a larger property. And within that, a good list of native plant nurseries throughout the state. So whether you're in Western Washington or Eastern or Central, there should be somewhere local that you can kind of get some good locally adapted plants that are great for wildlife to plant in your yard. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'd like to add that there's a really great resource in the form of a book called Landscaping for Wildlife in in the Pacific Northwest. Landscaping for Wildlife in the Pacific Northwest. And it's by Russell Link, who is a previous, I believe he was a wildlife biologist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And he wrote this amazing book all about how to build wildlife features and attract wildlife to residential landscapes in the state of Washington. And I know that that book is available on Amazon. And so that would also be a really great resource. It might be available at the library too, if you check.
Nice. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Great.
Andrea.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're going to stick with Elizabeth on this one. Is there anything we can do as individuals to help the monarch butterflies? And is this an issue in Washington state?
Yeah, it is an issue in Washington state. Washington is a part of the Western monarch migration pathway, and so monarchs travel through our state, to reach their breeding grounds down closer to the Baja area, Southern California. So we don't have breeding monarchs down here necessarily. They do have caterpillars at certain stages of their life cycle, and so milkweed is a really important plant that we are in desperate need of more. Showy milkweed is the species of milkweed that our native butterflies need the most. So I know that you can get showy milkweed either in the form of seeds. You can have them delivered in the mail. There's websites you can order them from. There's also showy milkweed available at a lot of native plant nurseries, and it tends to grow well in kind of moist or wet ground, so which is suitable for a lot of areas of the state, whether that's on the west side of the state or in kind of the riparian or damp areas along streams in the east side of the state. And so that's something that's really easy to do, and the flowers are beautiful, and it will attract butterflies and other native pollinators. So that's an easy thing that people can do either in their home or in their community.
All right, I see a question here about I-90. So I might ask Brian if you'd be willing to answer this one from Dave. Are there plans for further crossings on I-90 east of Snoqualmie Pass?
Well, I'll give it a little shot, but then maybe Glenn wants to chime in too, because I bet he has the real backyard baseball in this one. But there, I don't know how many you know are there now, but they're not done with I-90, and there are lots of structures going in, lots of underpasses most people don't even know are there. I don't know exactly when the done date is supposed to be, but I think what's scheduled now to be done is all the crossing structures that are going to be there. I don't think there's anything scheduled to go on that isn't part of the plan now. Is that right, Glenn?
No, not quite. So up at I-90, we have about 11 large wildlife crossings right now, and there are two final phases, phases 3 and 4, which will include 7 more large wildlife crossings. They're kind of the eastern half of the project area, from east and back west, about 7 miles. And that will include at least one more large wildlife overcrossing, several underpasses, and then many more smaller and medium-sized bridges that will help convey water and low mobility species like reptiles and amphibians as well. So there is, off the top of my head, I want to say right now the completion date somewhere around 2029, but things can change. It's got some time to go. And phase 3 is actually the easternmost portion, and then phase 4 is kind of this middle piece that will finish up there in the end, a smaller part. But a lot more excitement to come, I think. And I don't know if Scott, you wanted to weigh in on that too.
Yeah, I'll add a third piece. So what we're describing is what's collectively called the I-90 East project, just in the infancy stages, but there is a group looking to see, does there need to be some work from Easton to Clallam? That's called the I-90 Steer project, running by Kittitas County planners right now. They are having monthly meetings on that. And so if you would like to join those meetings, they're open to the public to learn some information on that. I'd be happy if you want to put your contact information in there. We'd be happy to get you information on how to sign up for that. And then even a little bit further east, some areas east of Ellensburg and towards Vantage, we again are just on the early stages of exploring connectivity in an area called Ryegrass. So that's some areas, if you've driven the areas, you've definitely seen there's been quite a bit of elk collisions and definitely some need for various species for connectivity there. So probably much more to come in the year's future. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting stuff going on even further east on I-80. So.
Great, thank you all. While we're talking about the I-90 wildlife crossing, which I think is probably the #1 gem in our state that people recognize, I would like to just kind of dig into a little bit of more details about that, because we see that beautiful bridge, and we know, we get to see when WashDOT posts all those amazing videos of the critters crossing over, and we all get really excited. But I just wanted to go a little bit back before we dive into the nitty gritty. So, I actually just learned that there were undercrossings near that bridge as well. Can you guys tell us a little bit, and maybe Scott, you can start this off. Why do we have undercrossings and then these big bridges in different locations, and why are they both important, and how do they serve wildlife differently?
Sure, I'd be happy to start, and then Brian and Glenn, I'm sure, has a lot of expertise in this as well. So while some animals are have some adaptability, we've definitely learned, say, some of our cats and other species definitely like a little bit more, tighter and close spaces, just kind of their natural habitats, versus sometimes elk and other more open range species definitely like more of a, open range area. We learned a lot of science from other structures, such as Banff National Park had become for us. And so a lot of our science kind of came from there, and some other areas we've adapted. One of the great things about, even though we have undercrossings in I-90, some of them are in excess of 100 feet wide and more than 16 feet tall. So even though animals like elk are using those undercrossings, in addition to other species, but generally, kind of the more animals are comfortable with a more open space, you generally think of those as kind of more overcrossings, and then the animals that are maybe a little bit more comfortable, all the way from cats down through maybe some of our, small mammals, herps, some other stuff. Generally, we kind of look for those that maybe undercrossings might be better. So I'd be happy to punt it to Glenn or Brian, and I'm sure they have more to add. So
I would just add, no, that's great, Scott. That's correct. Openness obligates like to go where there's openness, so that sometimes goes over because there's no under that's open. But I should mention, like, you can have huge viaducts, massive ones, but if it's too loud, or if there's too much human occupation, certain species won't use it. So sometimes it's not size, sometimes it's light, sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's how much cover or vegetation there is leading up to the structure. So depending on each individual species and their needs, both biological and sort of locomotive needs, can depend greatly on what needs to be there for them to actually want to use a structure and not, run away the first car that passes. Glenn, you want to chime onto that too?
I think you all hit on the concepts there. They're just different species that have different preferences for crossings. Some like tight spaces, some like open lines of sight, some need semi-aquatic features running through a structure like the herps, So yeah, it's really just species dependent, and we want to provide an array of structures that can support an ecosystem rather than just like a target species or something like that.
Excellent. Thank you. Real quick, I just want to make note that these are brilliant science brain people. What's a herp?
A reptile and amphibian, herpetofauna is there. Herp is the shorthand. So yeah, I got to watch that one because it sounds strange if you're not in.
It wasn't just Glenn, it was also Scott, but that's why you bring your communications people in. Yeah, thanks guys. As a follow-up on that, this one's probably for you, Glenn, since you're on camera. What are some of the largest animals you've seen successfully crossing the I-90 structure or any of the structures? And like, what have you been super excited to see recently using those crossing structures?
Yeah, well, the largest and very exciting is the moose. Back a little while ago, that most likely the same moose that now is living in Mount Rainier National Park. We've never had a moose south of I-90 or in Western Washington. A couple months after the crossing at Resort Creek, it showed up in Western Washington in the Cedar River watershed. Then a few weeks later, Mount Rainier. So that's probably the same one. Can't say with certainty, but female moose, right time of year, right travel lines. So that one was really exciting. Probably, I'm guessing, the biggest animal we have in our state, really. Of course, elk, probably the next largest, and we see lots of elk, thousands of crossings a year within Snoqualmie Pass East alone, and we have other crossing structures as well. I will just mention that across all the structures completed to date, at the end of this year, we surpassed 25,000 safe crossings that were documented with the cameras. And that doesn't even include all the small mammals, the reptiles and amphibians, aka herps, and the fish and others that Central Washington University, who's a great partner on this project, is also monitoring. And we've seen a lot of successes there too. So tons of species, we're getting them all. And the last part, the ones that excite me the most, you could probably guess, are the cougars. And we did have our first cougar crossing at Snoqualmie Pass of 2024 just a couple days ago, and that's the 7th one since the installation, and that's pretty good for 7-mile linear stretch of highway. These cougars moving around. So yeah, did I answer all parts of that?
Hey, Andrea, if it's okay, I'd like to chime in with another great I-90 story that doesn't get caught on camera, but Glenn, you kind of led into it there as far as some of the great work that our local Central Washington University has done in Ellensburg. And so one of the creeks, if you're driving west, you'll go through the overcrossing, and then kind of if you look down, there's a bridge there, and it's called, there's two bridges actually, and one's called Price Creek and one's called Noble Creek. And so before these, the stream literally ran in about a 4-foot culvert, no stream bed, really difficult for animals to move through. We built 120-foot bridges, put a natural stream bed in there, and a herpetological. So again, going back to frogs and salamanders, professor at Central Washington University, his name is Dr. Jason Irwin, took some students in there, and 5 days after we built the stream, they detected Pacific giant salamanders living in the new stream bed. And so it literally is a great example of you build it, they will come. So
Yeah, that's a great story I love too. And now I feel like I got to tell the Western toad one too. So just last one I want to mention, we talk about some of the biggest species we see on these overcrossings, but they've also documented using little GPS backpacks, a Western toad adult crossing over the entire I-90 overpass. And now at least 2 years in a row, Western toads have been breeding in a wetland south of I-90, and they've even documented Western toadlets coming out of those wetlands and crossing the overpass, which is just so cool to think about. The giant elk and the tiny little toadlets also, using the same structure.
Hey, Glenn, about how big is a Western toad, a full-grown adult Western toad?
An adult, it's probably, trying to think of what I can compare it to. I guess maybe if you flattened a baseball or something, that's the
Silver dollar
maybe
pancake.
a little smaller. Yeah, they're a decent sized toad for sure. But a toadlet, maybe the size of a dime or a quarter, depending on how recently they metamorphed.
That's quite the migration, definitely. Great. Thank you guys. All right. Next questions. We got lots of great questions here. Thanks. Keep them coming.
Yeah, now I'm curious what Elizabeth would say about the size of an adult toad.
I think that was pretty accurate.
Okay, just checking. And then we do have a question for Ted and Darren. And there were so many beautiful shots in this film. Somebody asks, there are some aerial shots in the film showing overhead unique water and land features. What part of Washington is that? I think I know what they're talking about. You might. You want to take a crack at it? Oh, you're muted though. Go ahead and unmute.
Okay, here I am. Yes, I'll be happy to answer that question. So we were very fortunate to partner with an organization called Lighthawk that has volunteer pilots, and they support nonprofits in their work and doing conservation work around the country. So I definitely want to give a nod to Lighthawk and to our particular pilot, Dan Marks, who it was fantastic. So what we did is we did a flight from Boeing Field here in Seattle, and we flew east over the Cascades and circled around the Columbia River and came back. We picked Scott and Elizabeth up along the way. But we felt that that was the best way to get the biggest view of how these landscapes are either fragmented or connected, to show that bigger view. So we've got a lot of drone shots in there. We've got some ground shots, but really to get that bigger view, I think was really necessary in order to show the real scale of the issue. And there are some problem areas. So in addition to celebrating the I-90 crossings, we have some areas in Washington that we really need to focus on. And I hope that those landscape shots there from the airplane kind of gave you a better glimpse of that.
Ted,
Thank you.
The perfect segue to my next question, because we get to work with Ted on all sorts of videos about all of the things that we're working on. So we're going to kick this over to Brian Stewart. Question about the I-5 corridor. So we've got what is the status of the Cascades to Olympics connectivity project? And are there I-5 crossings planned in Thurston County? And what does that look like? Where are they going to go? Where are we in the process? Do we know where they're going to go? Brian, why don't you just take a minute on the stage to talk about what the heck we do with I-5?
Sure. That's a lot of stuff there. I guess I'll back up and do the Cascades to Olympics part first. You know, the status of that is deep in the work of it. We haven't connected those things yet, but we're looking at all the different possible connections. We're looking at all the different landscape features and habitat types, and that, you know, including the basin, the Olympic Peninsula, obviously the Cascades, down the Wilpa Hills, really looking at all the opportunities there now that we have a lot of the mapping and science done, and we know where to look. To I-5, I've been working on I-5 myself since 2017 when I started my thesis on it, and I-5 has been a tough juggernaut to sort of crack and get at. But there are a couple linkages, the northern and southern linkages, as they're termed, that cross I-5. They're the only two viable linkages that cross I-5, as far as we know, anywhere in the state. As you know, I-5 pretty much cuts Western Washington in half, and thus the coast from the Cascades. We are in a process of trying to figure out where crossing structures might go, but it's been a struggle just to make that happen. But Thurston County is one of the places we're looking, and Cowlitz County, and we have a feasibility study that's ongoing right now, looking at where we might put crossing structures before we make recommendations or seek funding. And that should be wrapped up by May of this year. There'll be an opportunity for folks to check that out. If folks leave their information or get a hold of me offline, I can get you hooked up and you can be a part of the release of that information. But I will say this, we don't know where they're going yet, and there's no money yet. So we can't say for sure a structure is going there, but all the right people, DFW, WashDOT, tribal representatives are all looking into it as a group and trying to see how this feasibility study goes. Will determine what we do going forward and what's viable and what's not and how much it's going to cost. That being said, the areas that are left on I-5 should still probably be protected now. And there's so few of them and they're going so fast that 2 years from now, there may not be these opportunities. So if there are habitat patches near I-5 and they lead to corridors, they are important, whether there's a crossing structure there or not, just because of the current landscape and the way it looks. I think that was enough of me rambling.
And I'm going to just chime in right here when Brian talks about the basin, the Chehalis Basin. So just adding that.
Thank you, Andrea.
Over to you, Jen.
All right. Well, I have a question for Melissa, and this is kind of something I was thinking about. What are some things that members of the public can do to help with wildlife connectivity in their areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I saw a couple of participants asked about planting in their yard. That's like a great place to start. Even thinking about things like how much grass do you make out of or have in your property, how high you mow. I think a really big one that I think about all the time is fences. And so the video touches on that some, but fences really push wildlife around and change their patterns and movements, and it's often not for the best, right? Like it can push them towards roads or into development areas, towards cars, other things that we don't want. And so things like just kind of assessing if you have fencing structures in your yard. Other things to think about are like if you have property and you live near a stream or a river, you may have trees, and I know a lot of us want to see the river and be able, but removing like trees and vegetation like that can also really affect how animals move. And some animals need more open space things, and some animals need like intact riparian, or we call them riparian, but trees and plants along our rivers and streams. Yeah, there's so many things, just thinking about like even the chemicals that you use in your yard. All these things kind of affect wildlife in ways that we don't think about. And I think another thing, we know, like from watching the video, right, that putting in developments, while it may be good for people, really it can really affect how wildlife moves. And I don't remember if it was Brian, I believe it was you that was talking about how we need like wildlife to be considered in our planning processes. And as citizens, we have a powerful voice. If we're talking to our local government officials that this is something that we value and that that's important, we're talking to our friends and to our family, and they're voicing the same thing, that really helps a lot in these planning processes and thinking about what goes where, and even just shaping a development, right? So not all, maybe at the end of the day, we do need the development there, but it really shapes how it looks. So we have actual wildlife corridors going through the development. All these are small things, right? But they really add up big. And just even like our own behavior just on our own property and in our own home can really they can make big differences. And one last thing I'll throw in is lighting. Brian, I think you've also touched on that, but lights make a big difference. So I know that we all find a sense of, like, as humans, insecurity in having like the lights on around our house at night, but that has a huge impact on wildlife. And it's from little things like moths, right, to birds when they're migrating in other seasons. These are it has a big impact in how our animals move. Not even our local animals, but animals moving all the way from south to north across the continent. So those are some things I'd suggest that we think about, and always talk to your local habitat biologists. So Elizabeth and Scott are two amazing humans. You can always go and talk to them, and you can learn a lot. I always learn a lot when I talk to them. So it's never ending, but it's something that you can do. Just make all these little small changes at a time, and it really adds up.
Mhm. Thank you, Melissa. Really well said. And I'm glad you put a plug in for talking to your local biologists, because, not just with Fish and Wildlife, but other agencies and organizations like Conservation Northwest, there's so much knowledge. And often, I know I recently relocated from the west side to the east side, and there were all these things I just didn't know. And so reaching out to Department of Ecology, Department of Transportation, whoever you think might know something, and be curious and just keep asking questions, because, we can't know until we ask the questions. So thank
Jennifer,
you.
if I could add just a quick little thing tying back to the film here. When we created this film, we meant this film to be an outreach, not just for events like for tonight, but literally it's a publicly available video. It's on YouTube. We gave the links at both things. So whether or not you have an interested neighbor and you want them to get awareness, go to your local city planning commission and go show this video to them. While a lot of us are passionate, we can only do so much. So kind of everything, the more that everyone kind of shares and gets awareness in the state, I think that's really key, and start just kind of changing that perception of what is habitat connectivity. So yeah.
Yeah, Scott, building a community, right? Like building a community that supports wildlife, or just not even supports, right? But that we just build a culture around like having wildlife and living with wildlife, right? And so it feels a lot more intuitive than it does right now.
These are great tips. Thank you everyone for weighing in. And I'm gonna just kind of piggyback on this and say, we're a nonprofit, and right now it's the legislative season. So we are at the Capitol yelling at everybody about wildlife connectivity and conservation issues. And so if you are interested in these issues, as Conservation Northwest is a nonprofit, we do a lot of action alerts where we try to give you all the information about the bills that are going through the legislative process that really will support wildlife connectivity and and biodiversity. And I mean, all of this takes money, right? So if you don't follow Conservation Northwest, obviously I'm a little biased, but please do, because we will give you all the opportunities and try to make it easy for you to have your voice heard with our lawmakers and our legislators, because that is so critical that we get funding. And we've got some questions talking about money that we'll get into in just a minute, just teeing it up. But we really, the power of all of your voices is, we cannot understate that. And we can't do this without community support. And so just keep in mind, every email that you send to your legislators makes a difference. Every phone call, every sharing on social media. So we appreciate the support. So I just wanted to put that little plug in before we go. Oh, you guys have so many good questions. Okay, All right, here's one that's kind of adjacent, a little bit of a sidebar. We'll get back to the money stuff in a minute. So I think this is probably gonna be for one of our DFW friends, but so in the video you saw the off ramps for the ditches which transport water from rivers to farmland. Are those funded with grants that private owners can apply for, or does WDFW fund the installation and maintenance of those across the state? So it's a pretty specific question. So I'm not sure who our ditch expert and off-ramp expert would be. Would that be Scott maybe, or?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any KRD, Kittitas Reclamation District people on the panel tonight. The Kittitas Reclamation District was the irrigation company that was featured in the film talking about those wildlife off-ramps. And WDFW doesn't fund the installation of those or maintain them. That was undertaken by KRD, and so the funding would come from them. I'm not sure of the background of the exact funding sources, but it was through the Reclamation District.
One thing I can add as well, and I think that so KRD and then Urban Eberhardt, who was on the screen, is certainly a great example of this, is people that, you know, there's a lot of different funding sources and grants out there, and that people see sometimes it doesn't explicitly state that the grant, but knowing that, hey, you know, you might apply for a water crossing or water conservation through some of our climate change grants, some other grants like this, but go, okay, well, I'm going to add wildlife fence to this and apply to that in the grant. So a lot of times, maybe grants aren't directly related to fencing, often get added into, so it can kind of be a multi-purpose grant. And so I would encourage, you know, kind of some of our best success stories is if you can find people that have really good kind of creative minds and start kind of building that kind of multidisciplinary partnership. Often that's how a lot of these actually wind up getting solved is, you know, put a biologist with a water resource manager or with a county planner, and together they can all just kind of, you know, kind of build upon each of those skills. So that's often how we kind of get these wins. So.
Great, thank you, Scott. One quick follow-up on just talking about the ramps. We have another question here. So for the animal ramps in the reservoirs, like we saw in the film, what types of animals do you see most getting stuck? And maybe, again, I know that we don't have our ramp expert here this evening, but who's using those ramps, and is it kind of the same thing as the wildlife crossings where it's from small to big, or maybe our biologists can chime in on that?
Well, I can definitely say that the most visible animals are ungulates, deer, elk, you know, other things. And so those big ramps are designed to be able to provide footing for the deer that might happen to fall in, like we saw in the video. So those are certainly the most visible animals. Scott, you might have more information on other species that show up, but those are definitely the ones that we take the most note of.
Like you said, Elizabeth, I primarily they're used by ungulates. While it's a bit of a depressing story, a lot of times the water under irrigation canals are fairly fast, and so a lot of times smaller animals do fall in, but they don't necessarily have the power to kind of even you know, saw there with some great advantageous things like ropes. But say imagine if you're you know, a ground squirrel or you're a bird that falls in. And so I think we do need to continue to kind of work on other innovative ways to get the smaller animals out, because primarily right now these are designed to kind of save our larger ungulates. So I think that's great. We're doing some good work, but I think we need to continue doing some work to make sure that we, you know, don't just save deer, but we, you know, can save bats and we can save ground squirrels and birds and all wildlife matter. So.
Great points. So Elizabeth, you might want to answer this. I know you did in the chat Q&A. Is there anything that we can do as individuals to help the monarchs? Is that an issue in Washington State? And then I have another little question for you about how to track the little tiny toads. How do you actually do that? It's kind of a twofer.
Yeah, well, like was shared earlier, showy milkweed is a really good species of flowering plant that homeowners or even cities, or if you manage an open space in your community, showy milkweed is a really great plant that monarchs are attracted to. And so that really helps with providing a food, a nectar source for those animals. So people who want to help monarchs, showy milkweed, and you can find that online by buying seeds or at native plant nurseries. And what was the next part of the question?
Somebody was asking, how do you actually track a tiny toad? Do you put something on their body? What do you do?
Yeah, several ways. We saw, I think there was a picture, or Glenn might have talked about the little tiny backpack transmitters that we can actually put on these animals. There's also the old-fashioned way of just going out and using your eyes. We know when the toads are moving, when they're moving from the wetlands to the uplands and vice versa. And so we can go out there and visually look at them. If you set up a wildlife camera, you might be able to catch them. So there's a variety of ways that you can keep track of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we're gonna go over to Glenn from WashDOT for this one. Is the state retrofitting many culverts that can become wildlife crossings? And how does connectivity work fit or not with the culvert refittings for salmon?
Yeah, great question. And I think my answer may also answer the question about habitat connectivity planning processes, or at least one answer to that question. And so, yes, there's a very close fit between salmon and terrestrial wildlife passage and fish passage in general. And at WashDOT, we do have a policy of evaluating the upcoming fish barrier removal projects and then offering recommendations on how they can be enhanced to increase terrestrial wildlife use and semi-aquatic species as well. And we have a prioritization framework that helps us identify high priority areas, and that helps us identify which fish passage projects to make these recommendations for. And we've written about 135 of those recommendations to date. It's a slow process. You know, sometimes we put these things in 4 or 5 years before construction planning even begins. But even so, we've seen some pretty good successes so far. There's a lot more to come, I'm hopeful. One really good example is I-5 on Padden Creek, just south of Bellingham. That one was widened pretty well. A lot of nice habitat features in there. We monitored that for a year pre-construction, not a single deer crossing, and we just finished that last year, literally a year ago tomorrow. And we're already just seeing tons of deer use, lots of other species. The one big question I do have, you know, when it was a tiny little culvert, we actually were seeing a bobcat use it frequently. One bobcat, but all the time. And now we got this big structure and the bobcat hasn't come back yet. But I think it's only a matter of time. We've seen bobcats use these types of structures. There's plenty of cover features, downed wood, root wads, that kind of thing in there. So yeah, they definitely go together. I think it's a huge opportunity for us to combine these two. The ability to increase the structure sized for fish to make it beneficial for terrestrial wildlife is a fraction of the cost of building that wildlife crossing alone. Sometimes it's less than 1% of the total fish passage project price just to make it a little bigger, add a couple features like a wildlife bench. It's basically a hiking trail for wildlife. It facilitates movement. And, you know, a few other habitat considerations. And so it really is a massive opportunity. But the one caveat, well, there's several, but the one I'll mention is that, you know, a lot of our fish barrier work, the vast majority of it is centered in this injunction area that's like 2/3 of Western Washington. And so that's where all our opportunities are coming. And some of our worst collision areas, most of them are actually outside that injunction area. So we're certainly providing a lot of benefits, but it's not a silver bullet because we need to think about the other 4/5 of the state, basically.
And can I hop in to add something? Because in addition, I just want to note that when we're talking about connectivity, culverts are an issue for salmon connectivity for salmon, right? And so like that's another thing in addition to all the other work that we're doing. Culverts oftentimes leave it so that salmon and other fish can't move upstream, downstream, in the various stages of their life. And yeah, it's really nice when things align and you can make it a part of like wildlife connect, like the larger wildlife connectivity work that we're talking about tonight, but it is wildlife connectivity as well, even though we don't think about that.
I'm just going to chime in here really quick. We are coming a few minutes before the 7 o'clock hour. However, all of our wildlife loving nerds on this panel are happy to stay later. So we have a ton of questions we haven't gotten to. So if you'd like to stay a little bit later, we're here for a little bit. We're going to keep the discussion going. So I just wanted to point that out. Obviously, if you only had an hour to spend with us, we're very grateful. And we are all available and easily found on the internet. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And I'm going to throw it back over to Jennifer for our next question.
Thanks, Andrea. This one I think is probably for one or more biologists here. It's from Chase Cannell. Pronghorn antelope have been reintroduced to South Central and North Central Washington in recent years. What projects underway to connect these populations? What projects are underway to connect these populations and their shrub steppe habitat? And maybe that would be Brian or even Andrea. I don't know. So do you want to give that one a go, Brian, or toss it elsewhere?
To give it to first of all, hi Chase.
Yes.
Also, I'm
hi Chase.
Make sure a scientist answers that.
An eccentric person would be much better, I think. Scott, you want to take a crack at it?
Actually, if she's willing, I'd love for Jordan to take a crack at this. So.
Oh, we're bringing in our background. So we do have a couple secret Conservation Northwest staff members who are brilliant, and they're in behind the scenes. So Jordan, she works in the shrub steppe. Are you willing to come on camera, or even, just microphone?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for this great question, Chase. There's a lot of work being done by the Yakima Nation and the Colville Confederate Tribes, reintroducing pronghorn and then also monitoring these populations after they've been reintroduced into Washington state. So there have been a lot of projects, like fencing projects specifically, to try to reduce barriers for pronghorn, as well as some habitat restoration work that's been going around Central Washington.
And I'll just mention too, we have seen a few pronghorn in our carcass removal data. They're still really rare in this state, and they're starting to show up mostly from the Yakima population, in fact, only from down there. But I think in terms of transportation planning for pronghorn, I think we're going to need some more time for these animals to kind of acclimate to this area, establish actual movement patterns. They came out of Nevada, and it's just going to take a while. But it is something that we're keeping in mind. One of the locations up on US 97 that hopefully will be one of the next places to have a wildlife crossing is really close to one of those areas where the Colville are releasing pronghorn. And so we are kind of trying to consider their needs as well as we work on that US 97 project. And then down there by Yakima, I think it's State Route 221 off the top of my head, this little random highway in the shrub steppe where we've had at least 2 or 3 pronghorn within a handful of miles hit recently, past 2-3 years, I think. But I think we just got to wait, take some time.
I was going to add on my colleagues at Conservation Northwest are very modest, but I was going to mention they have a great program called Sageline's Heritage Program. And so they're actually really heavily working on this project, including some awesome stuff called virtual fencing. And so actually that helps kind of tackle some of the fencing issue. And so go on there and actually look at some of the great work that we're doing out in the Sagelands to try to tackle this issue. It's being led by a lot of our Jordan and a lot of her team, Jay Keeney. And so go on there and learn some great work they're doing. So,
yeah, thank you for that, Scott. Yeah, this is a very exciting project. I would like to say it's still a pilot project, but it's been so successful that I think it's just a project. So basically, on our Conservation Northwest website, there's lots of information about virtual fencing, but it's literally, we're bringing down the barbed wire across the state, and that is absolutely unbelievable for wildlife. The best thing about virtual fences is that the ranchers don't have to build fences, which are very expensive. They burn up in wildfires. They're, expensive to maintain. It's good for the cattle. It's good for the wildlife. It's good for everybody. Everybody wins. So that's just a little plug on that. We'll have actually, we're working with Ted on a whole other video about virtual fencing. So stay tuned for that. But on the information about Highway 97, I would like to stick with that for just a second. And Glenn, hopefully you can chime in on this. So Highway 97 is one of our big success stories so far. We touched on it very briefly in this short film. I wish this film could have been 3 hours long, but no one has time for that. So we have a question from someone that would like to know the status of the plans for crossings on 97. And Glenn, maybe you can give a brief little history. And then it's in Okanagan County for those of you who don't travel on US 97 very much. And they are specifically asking near the junction with Pine Creek Road. So that is very specific. So Glenn, get your Thomas guide out and hopefully you can share your answer with us.
Yeah, no, I know Pine Creek Road. That is the section just south of Janus Bridge, essentially, that we're targeting, that we call Phase 2. We did submit a proposal to the Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program that went unfunded last cycle for 2 new wildlife crossings in that area with fencing and a few other features. And we recently discussed and debriefed why that wasn't funded. And I won't go too far into it, but basically we were told it's one of the best out there. They had no notes for improvements and to resubmit at the next grant cycle. So, fingers crossed that will mean we'll get funded next time, which is probably grant cycle will open in like 2 months or so. So we're still working towards that. We're pretty confident that we have a good project up there. It is Washington's worst collision area in the state. It's also the largest mule deer herd in the state, so it kind of makes sense. And I don't think it was mentioned in the video, but when that 1 mile of fencing was installed leading up to Janus Bridge over the Okanagan River, we did mention, 91% decrease in collisions year over year, but we also were documenting literally thousands of mule deer crossings a year, every year at that one bridge, which is more than we've documented at any single structure anywhere else in the state. And that does include Snoqualmie Pass. And it's not a knock on Snoqualmie Pass by any means, because that's been monumentally successful. It just goes to show that the mule deer are in Okanagan, south of Tonasket. They're in that area. They need places to cross, and they will use them if they're provided. So fingers crossed that we'll have more good news about that soon. The one I do want to say, there were 2 successes from that grant cycle that Washington will reap the benefits of, and there is a wildlife overcrossing that the Still-Squamish tribe was funded to complete on State Route 20. That's one of the worst elk collision areas in the state. And the Puyallup tribe won over $200,000 to begin a feasibility study on US 12 in the Packwood vicinity, which is another top 3 elk collision area in the state, and also harbors many rare and endangered species like wolverine, fisher, Cascade red fox, you name it. It's probably up there close to White Pass. So Washington is going to get some money from those federal grant pots, and hopefully we'll be able to bring some more in next year too for US 97. And I'll just say, fun fact about pronghorns is they are also in that openness obligate category Scott was talking about. They really need those wide open lines of sight. And most studies say they require overpasses. You could probably force some under an underpass, but they've had a setup in Wyoming where they had an overpass and an underpass right next to each other, kind of like the Price Noble and the overcrossing on 90. And 93% of the pronghorn used the overpass, and it was like a sample size of 40,000. So it was, pretty strong there.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. All right, Jennifer, what's the next question we've got for these folks?
Well, I see a question about marketing plan. What is your marketing plan to help raise public awareness on social media and news outlets for getting the public more involved in wildlife conservation initiatives in Washington? So I'm gonna look at Andrea and Brian and Jordan.
Well,
primarily.
I am thrilled about this question because it's something I think about while I'm awake and sleeping all of the time. So basically right now, so for Conservation Northwest, our main focus is protecting wildlands and connectivity. I mean, like we have 30 different projects going on around the state. This is a cornerstone of our work. And then it falls on me and my team and my wonderful partners to figure out how to get people to drink our Kool-Aid, right? Like we want you guys to buy in and help us save wildlife and get funding for these, and if it's grants or legislative funding, federal dollars, state dollars, etc. So this is, I mean, basically why I have a job. So we use every tool in our toolbox, and that is sign up for our email list. So, and it's very different with our partners. So we've got government agencies working with nonprofits, and we can kind of communicate in different ways. So I first thing would say, follow us all on social media. That is, you know, everything I put out is also on our social media, whatever platform you prefer. And then sign up for our emails, and that's how we send out these action alerts, which sometimes happen very quickly, where it's like right now, legislative work is happening. We want to tell the senators we need this funding to happen for connectivity. And we rely on you folks to take 90 seconds and fill out a form, and that does a world of good. So we're on social media. I mean, a lot of my time is spent talking to reporters, getting earned media. So when you see us in the news, TV, radio, newspaper, etc., that is how we try to get the word out. I mean, basically, I mean, we're talking about it over coffee at our local coffee shop. I mean, I will not shut up about wildlife connectivity where my friends and family are like, yeah, we got it. So it is a huge part of our job as communications people, is to make sure that the work that our scientists are doing on the ground is getting out there, is easily digestible, is understandable, and people understand what we're asking of them. And then we just hope that you guys all have the passion for it and the desire, and we try to make it really easy. Like, we don't want to ask a lot of you all, but like 3 minutes to send a letter to the senator or to, you know, sign on to a petition is generally what we're asking. So that's from my perspective, from the nonprofit side. And we just try to cover all of our bases and get this information out for everybody to know the challenges that we face, and more importantly, the solutions that are out there, so you can help us get to that point.
Thank you. And you know, I might just nudge Melissa here too a little bit to see what, you know, what tools you've had in your toolbox and ideas that you might share with folks.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I've in my previous work, I did a lot of what Andrea was talking about too, right? So how do you take wildlife and make it relatable to other people, so that they feel connected to it? A lot of us are really passionate, or just kind of have like a sense of love for some creature in the woods. And so as like a local citizen, right, when I'm like talking to my friends or talking to family, or I'm just talking to people in my community that, you know, I happen into a conversation with about these things, you know, I try to kind of spend a minute just figuring out maybe some things that they care about, right? And then trying to have it relate back. And I find that to be a really powerful way of building some sense of care. And that kind of, you know, goes back to like trying to build that community around things like wildlife connectivity, and just we, you know, we live where we live because like we value the area that we live in. That's true for most Washingtonians, whether you live in an urban area or a rural area. You know, if you live in an urban area, chances are you probably go visit like a park, or you head out into the woods, and that's because like you love those places and you love the things that live in it. And so, you know, I think Andrea had some really great suggestions. I think like the personal, right, is like the foundation of how we get to the point where we kind of have like a Washington community that cares about these things. And then that trickles down into like those planning processes I was talking about earlier, right? And it's like a cultural shift.
Thank you. Well said.
Let's see, we have Brian's hand up.
Brian. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to tag on to that. So communicating and how we might do that. So we talked about writing senators and talking to people, but you know, are you reading comment? Are you doing comments in your local county and their planning? Can you add connectivity to those comments? Can you talk, if there's a development you're not already happy about, can you use that as a way to talk about connectivity and the importance of that area for connectivity? And the other thing is realizing what connectivity is and what it's connected to, right? When I'm talking about connectivity, I'm talking about road safety, climate change adaptation, genetics. I'm talking about ecosystem services. I'm talking about ecological connectivity. Once you understand that there's all these nuance, sort of a myriad of ways connectivity influences all of these things, you'll find that there isn't really a conversation that's being had about the environment or people that isn't related to connectivity, whether that's fire, whether that's flood. All of these things connect to connectivity. I hate to use the word twice, but that's just the truth of it. And in the basin, connectivity is both flood and wildlife and fish and all these things on top of each other, which is climate change, which is all these other things. So one important communication tool is to understand that almost any conversation that comes up, connectivity is a piece of it if you think about it on sort of a nuanced or deeper level. And so getting people to see that connection, that when I'm talking about this, it means that, and when I'm talking about this, it also means that, is huge, because then they'll realize that almost every problem they read about could at least be benefited a little bit, if not solved, by habitat connectivity. So I'll leave it at that.
Brian, can I add a little piece of that? Because I think there's so much value in that. And I just want to say, one of the really key things as a citizen you can do too, if you're not already knowledgeable about this, is going and talking to a planner and learning what they care about. Like, what do they need to hear from you that will be impactful? Because just saying that, for instance, that a development shouldn't be here, right? Like that is not what they need to hear in order to make a change. They need to be able to respond to something. So just sitting down and spending a little bit of time with a planner, or I don't know, Andrea, if you guys would provide, but trying to learn about the process and how to have an impact in that process goes a long way in actually getting these incremental changes that we need, right? And to get that connectivity piece that Brian was talking about, which is fundamental. In connectivity, I love that, Brian, so much. Yeah, connectivity with everything.
I love how you both perfectly described connectivity is connected to connections and everything's connected. So so I mean, we throw these words around, but yeah, nothing is in a silo, and it's not like wildlife live in this place that we don't live in. We all live in the same place, and I think that message is so important. I mean, we've got black bears in Redmond, and we're all in their neighborhood, and so it's up to us to make it good for all of us, and we're all neighbors. So I really appreciate that perspective from you folks. We've got a really.
I did see Scott had his hand up too.
Can I add just a couple seconds? I was going to say, so when we're doing connectivity science, we want to get tools in the hands of people that are using them, and that includes citizens, planners. And so a lot of the connectivity corridors we've mapped is on the DFW website. We have a program called Priority Habitats and Species. And so literally just go on dfw.wa.gov and type in Priority Habitats and Species. There's a web app called their Web PHS on the web, and the corridors that we've mapped are on there. And so just zoom into your local area, and then you can take that information, like Melissa was talking about, go talk to your local planner and go, you know what, I care about this area. The connectivity experts have mapped this, like they have the science that says this is a important area, and start that conversation. So yeah.
Thank you, Scott. That's super helpful. I'm just going to address, we had a couple of questions, which I think we have to do a whole other webinar about, but about some of our big carnivores. So grizzlies was brought up, and the grizzly reintroduction and restoration to their native home here in Northeast Washington. So that's something that we're really involved in with Conservation Northwest. We have a coalition with many of our partners called Friends of the North Cascades Grizzly. It's up to the federal government right now. It's up to the Biden administration to decide if we're going to be putting bears back into where they have historically lived in the North Cascades ecosystem. They've been separated through fragmentation and habitat fragmentation, and now and also through human intervention of killing them over the years. So this is a big project. Of course, it's very polarized. I'd be happy to share any more information about grizzlies. Same with wolves. Wolves are doing great. Wolf restoration is doing wonderful in Washington State. It's doing so well that we're actually donating some wolves to Colorado to help with their populations. So this is maybe a little bit in the weeds for this conversation, but if you want to talk grizzlies and wolves, reach out to, well, you can remember my name, it's Andrea Wolf Buck. So at Conservation Northwest, I'm happy to go into more details, but I just wanted to address that because that's definitely something that we're seeing in the news. Wolves and bears always grab headlines. So I'm always happy to talk about that. But I think that we're going over time here, and so many great questions. Thank you for all of the engagement. Let's see if there are, Jennifer, do you see maybe one or two final questions in here that we haven't touched on that we think would be?
Yeah, so there was one related to what you were just saying, the question, which would be for Glenn, whether we've seen wolves or bears on any of the wildlife crossings.
Great question.
So no wolves yet. We're expecting that to change one of these days. But probably most likely, if we were to see them, it would be somewhere at Snoqualmie Pass. We know that they're in close proximity, and they have crossed I-90, but just not at Snoqualmie Pass, a little further east of there. But bears, black bears, yes. Again, not many at Snoqualmie Pass, and that's probably due to the elevation and the acclimation period of these bears. I think we will start to see them soon. But at other wildlife crossings in the state, we've documented a lot of black bear activity. In fact, the first wildlife crossing ever built back in 1976, it's on I-90 outside of North Bend. When we monitored that about 10 years ago, we documented one of the highest black bear passage rates that we were able to find anywhere, even in the literature, across the country, just a black bear superhighway, basically. And that is a nice dark arch culvert with, as you can probably guess, mature forests because it was built over 50 years ago. Surrounding it. And so that probably really facilitated that black bear movement there because they never have to leave forest cover. And we've seen them other places as well. Black bear are really not that picky when it comes to size. It's more about the habitat, in my opinion. They want those cover features, but they'll go through a pretty small culvert. They'll go through a large culvert or a bridge if there's habitat features and cover and that kind of thing. And then the last thing I'll say is one time we saw a 450-pound male black bear just outside Issaquah, under the East Fork Issaquah Creek Bridge, and 300 pounds is a large black bear, and this one is 450 pounds. So big that when I showed it to the bear biologist, Rich Beausoleil, he literally knew that bear. He's like, I know that bear, and then we got to, talk all about him. So yeah, and lots of cubs too. We've seen cubs using these structures as well. So bears are somewhat easy to please, even if it maybe will take them a little while to acclimate to like brand new structures on the landscape, like up at Snoqualmie Pass. And because they hibernate, they're really only out there sometimes. To get at the seasonality question earlier, depending on where you're at, yeah, you can see huge swings in wildlife crossing structure use for seasons. Snoqualmie Pass, somewhere around November, December, when the snow starts getting deep, the elk are gone. They go to lower elevations, and we don't see them again until probably April. There's a pretty big gap. But then you do get awesome coyotes and bobcats crossing in the snow. It's kind of the carnivore's world then. But crossing numbers in total drop significantly over the winter at Snoqualmie Pass. But if you're down in the bottomlands, it's probably going to stay relatively consistent.
Great. Thank you. And just to clarify, that was about black bears because we do not have grizzlies yet in Washington State, but we're hoping to bring them back sometime in the future. So, all right. Well, I think Jennifer, I'm gonna throw it over to you to wrap up. And thank you for everyone that has stuck with us over time and these amazing questions. And we obviously want this conversation to keep going. Like this is just kind of one of the stepping stones in our communication plan to make sure that all of you folks that are interested in these issues have the information that you need and have access to all these experts. I mean, that's the thing, is we are all here to serve the public, and all of these folks are available to help. We love the questions. Email, reach out, join our little club. It's fun in here. So Jennifer, I'm going to throw it over to you, see if there's one last really juicy question that we want to tackle before we let everyone go have their dinner.
I like this one. Thanks, Andrea. How can we greatly expand the implementation of this connectivity work It seems the challenges are outpacing the solutions. Yeah.
Winning the lottery would help if you're into connectivity. That's my goal. Not the best answer, but yeah, we need more money. I mean, it really is a financial thing. There are federal dollars available for the first time ever, so there are changes happening as we speak, and momentum is kind of gaining. So there are solutions on the horizon that we didn't have 5 years ago.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, kind of touching back on what we've said a few times. So generally, the money follows public interest. What do people in the state care about? And so that was kind of the goal of this video, is to increase public's interest, passion for wildlife connectivity. So I think that's probably one of the first steps is, if you enjoyed this video tonight, you enjoyed the discussion, we're going to attempt to even try to have some other showings, some other even in-person showings throughout the state. So tell a friend, tell 10, get some other people passionate. And eventually, if you keep growing that enthusiasm, if a large percent of Washington decides it's a good idea, money is going to get allocated towards that. So voters speak with their interests. So yeah.
Well, and Scott, that's a great point. We've made this video as an educational tool. So if you are interested in showing this in whatever community group or workplace, or just like, you invite your grandma over and you want to show this film, reach out to us. We might have, a couple of our experts available, and we would love to talk about it and answer questions. And the whole point of this is just to get the message out and be available for all of you to get more information and understand what is happening. A lot of this, drive over I-90, you have no idea what's happening under that freeway. So we would love to be involved in any outreach activities that you would like. Reach out to me, Andrea Wolfbuck at Conservation Northwest. I can help facilitate. And also I have to do just a tiny little plug because I am nonprofit. If you would like to come and have a fabulous dinner on April 18th at the Conservation Northwest auction, that's also another way to support, or just, follow our information, follow our emails. And we work so closely with our government partners, with the WDFW and WashDOT. We're always sharing each other's information. It's a very collaborative process. So we're here. We're here. Anyone that's interested, we want you to reach out to us and get engaged. So I'm going to leave it at that. And then Jennifer, any closing remarks for our wonderful audience here?
Well, I was just going to say what you said. Contact us, reach out if you have any questions. I'm available as a communication specialist for WDFW, and so is Andrea. And I was trying to figure out how to put our email addresses in the chat here, Q&A for everybody, but I'm not sure how. So maybe Jordan or somebody can help with that.
Or I have to see every message on Conservation Northwest social media on all the platforms. So just DM us. We could be hip. Yeah. So yeah, reach out. We're here for you. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. This was a long time in the making. It took a lot of folks to come together to come up with this video. We hope it was worthwhile. We hope it was informative. We really appreciate you taking time with us. And there's going to be lots more events. Reach out if we can help with anything.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.